The Supreme Court LGBT ruling that just happened is problematic, to say the least. If you somehow went through your entire day yesterday without seeing anything about this, let's just look at it. From NPR, they call it a major victory to LGBTQ employees. They say, in the historic decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled Monday that the 1964 Civil Rights Act protects gay, lesbian, and transgender employees from discrimination based on sex. The vote was 6-3, with Justice Neil Gorsuch, President Trump's first appointee to the court, writing the majority opinion. Out of the 6 justices who voted in favor, 2 of them were appointed by conservative presidents and 4 by liberals. Justice Gorsuch wrote, "It is impossible to discriminate against a person for being homosexual or transgender without discriminating based on sex." So the basic idea here is they are looking at the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and saying that when it says you can't discriminate based on sex, which back then they meant based on whether you're a man or a woman, they are now interpreting that to mean your sexual orientation or your gender identity. And Gorsuch admits as much. He acknowledged that Congress in 1964 likely did not have the LGBT community in mind when it banned discrimination based on sex. Nevertheless, he and the other justices who agreed with him deemed it in their purview to change the meaning of a bill that was passed more than half a century ago. Now, perhaps at this point, you don't see any of the issues at play. And I don't necessarily blame you. Looking at this, it seems like a good thing. Not being discriminated against based on your sexual orientation or your gender identity is something that most people can basically agree on. So to see what the actual issues may be, let's look at the dissenters and see what they said. From this article in CNN, we have that Justice Samuel Alito wrote in his dissent that even if discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity could be squeezed into some arcane understanding of sex discrimination, the context in which Title VII was enacted would tell us this is not what the statute's terms were understood to mean at the time. Which is essentially what Neil Gorsuch already admitted to. We saw that he admitted that was not the intent of the original bill. Sex likely did not include sexual orientation. And Brett Kavanaugh brings up another point. I believe that it was Congress's role, not this court's, to amend Title VII. I therefore must respectively dissent from the court's judgment. He is saying something that many conservatives agree with. It's not really the job of the Supreme Court to enact laws, and that kind of seems like what's happening here. Which is what this Washington Examiner piece says as well. The redefinition of sex is a loss for our constitutional order. If the Supreme Court can rewrite Title VII to include gender identity, a concept that was not included in the meaning of sex when the law was drafted, it can rewrite anything. That reality threatens our ability to rely on our laws as Congress wrote them. It continues and says, rewriting the law to include gender identity as a protected status should be a power held solely by the legislative branch. And Congress has declined to make this change multiple times. What they are saying is this was not the job of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's job is to enforce the law, not to reinterpret the law based on our cultural norms. In 1964, they did not mean it to include sexual orientation or gender identity. And many times since, as we see here, Congress has declined to include that in the Civil Rights Act. So the Supreme Court now jumping in and saying actually that is what it means is kind of skirting around the Constitution. That's not their job. And that's why many people are upset. Not because they're homophobic or transphobic, it's because they believe that the constitutional order has been disrupted. Now let me bring up a few more issues here before we close. One is obviously, how is this going to interact and affect religious freedom? Gorsuch included that as a potential caveat. He noted, for instance, that some employers might have valid religious objections to hiring gay or trans workers. For example, if you work at a Catholic school, I think it's acceptable that the school require you to abide by their norms. There's also the issue of what really constitutes discrimination. Now obviously, if you don't hire someone because of their sexual orientation or gender identity or anything like that, you can argue that it's discrimination, and I basically agree with you. But would it also count as discrimination if an employer says they believe in biological sex, meaning that a man is a man and a woman is a woman? Would that then give an employee who was trans the right to sue their employer for creating a discriminating work environment? For example, someone like J.K. Rowling, who recently made fun of an article entitled "Creating a More Equal Post-COVID-19 World for People Who Menstruate." And she said, "People who menstruate, I'm sure there used to be a word for those people. Someone help me out." And in response, people are accused her of being anti-trans and transphobic. So if an employer says something similar, and they have a trans employee who gets upset and views that as discrimination, can they be sued? These are things that weren't really cleared up by the case. And again, just because someone is against this Supreme Court case does not mean that they want to discriminate or they're transphobic or anything like that. Many of them view this as a disruption of the order. that the Supreme Court is given consistently more power, and they make decisions like this which make it seem like they're the ones creating the laws. Redefining sex in this manner seems similar to when they redefined marriage to include gay marriage. The point of contention is that it shouldn't have been up to the Supreme Court so much as Congress. Really quickly, I do find it kind of ironic and funny that the liberals, who hated Brett Kavanaugh with a passion, that thought he was this horrible, horrible person, have really no qualms about giving him and the other Supreme Court justices even more power by celebrating things like this. Let me know what you think about this down in the comment section below. And if you disagree with me, let me know that too. I'm interested to hear your reasons for why I'm wrong. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.